The patients in room 314 have been dead for 3 days, but they keep pressing their call buttons. The red lights blink above their door every night at 2:17 a.m., followed by weak voices crackling through the intercom, asking for water, pain medication, someone to adjust their pillows so they can sleep more comfortably. When I check on them, their bodies are still and cold under the hospital blankets. Their monitors showing flat lines that haven't jumped in 72 hours. But their eyes track my movement across the room like they're still very much aware of everything happening around them. The morgue attendant stopped coming to collect them after the first night, when he found their bodies sitting upright in the transport bags, asking him politely if he could take them back to their rooms, because they weren't quite finished with their stay. Now the dead patients just remain in 314, participating in their own ongoing care, commenting on the weather, requesting specific items from the cafeteria menu, and thanking me for the excellent service whenever I bring them blankets they can no longer feel. My name is Dewey Hutchins, and 6 months ago I was working double shifts at Baptist Health in Little Rock, saving every penny to get my daughter through her last year at Henderson State. Then Mama got sick, the kind of sick that eats through savings accounts faster than chemotherapy eats through hope. When the medical bills started piling up like autumn leaves on Highway 62, I knew I had to find something that paid better than city hospital work. That's how I ended up in Cherokee Village, population 4,671, tucked between the Spring River and enough pine trees to hide whatever the locals don't want outsiders seeing. The Ozark Medical Center sits on the edge of town like a concrete afterthought, 3 stories of beige brick that was probably considered modern back when Nixon was president. The pay was almost double what Baptist offered, which should have been my first warning. Nobody pays premium wages for routine work, especially not in a town where the most exciting thing that happens is when Earl Pickens drives his pickup into Miller's Pond after too many Budweisers at the VFW. The second warning came during my interview with Dr. Miranda Thorne, the night supervisor. She had the kind of smile that belonged in a church directory, all practiced warmth and careful angles, but her hands shook when she poured coffee from the break room pot. She spent most of our conversation explaining how different rural nursing could be from city work. Different protocols, different expectations, different ways of handling situations that might seem unusual to someone accustomed to standard procedures. We serve a unique population here, she told me, shuffling through a manila folder thick with typed pages. Folks who've lived in these hills for generations, people with their own understanding of life and death and everything in between. Sometimes traditional medical approaches need adjustment. She handed me a laminated card with 8 numbered items printed in careful block letters. These are our evening protocols. Follow them exactly. No exceptions, no variations. The patients expect consistency, and consistency keeps everyone safe. I should have read that card more carefully before signing the employment contract. I should have asked why the previous night nurse left after only 2 weeks, or why the hospital keeps a dedicated grief counselor on staff despite having fewer than 40 beds. I should have wondered why a small-town medical center needed protocols for handling things that don't exist in any nursing textbook I'd ever studied. But Mama needed those treatments, and Cherokee Village Medical paid cash bonuses for weekend shifts. So I took the job. My first shift started at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, which Dr. Thorne said was perfect timing since the hospital typically stayed quiet until after midnight. She walked me through the 3rd floor, our primary ward, pointing out medication storage, emergency equipment, and the communication system that connected each room to the nursing station. Janet Kessler works days, she explained, gesturing toward a framed photo of a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She's been here 14 years, knows every family in 3 counties. You'll overlap with her for 30 minutes each morning, just long enough to exchange information about patient conditions and any developments from the previous evening. The 8 protocols were typed on heavy cardstock, each rule numbered and laminated to prevent damage from repeated handling. Dr. Thorne handed me a copy along with my security badge and medication keys. "Read these tonight during your break," she said. "Study them until you could recite them in your sleep. Some might seem strange, but each one exists for very specific reasons based on experiences we've had over the years." She paused at the elevator, checking her watch. A vintage Timex that looked like it belonged to her grandfather. "Dewey, I want you to succeed here. This job can be rewarding if you follow procedures exactly as written. But rural medicine requires flexibility that city hospitals don't teach. Sometimes patients need care that goes beyond standard nursing practices." After she left, I settled into the nursing station and examined my new workplace. The 3rd floor held 24 rooms, currently housing 16 patients according to the census board. Most were elderly residents from local nursing homes who needed IV antibiotics or wound care, routine cases that wouldn't challenge someone with my experience. Room 314 held 3 patients, all listed as comfort care only, with identical admission dates from 3 days ago. I pulled out the protocol card and began reading. Protocol 1. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not respond to call lights from room 314 until exactly 2:17 a.m. When you do respond, bring only what they request. Do not offer additional assistance. Protocol 2. If patients in other rooms report seeing children in the hallways, acknowledge their concern, but do not investigate. Children are not permitted in the hospital after visiting hours. Protocol 3. The elevator to the basement morgue stops functioning at midnight. Use the stairwell, but do not enter the basement level. Leave any required materials on the landing. Protocol 4, Room 3. O1 must remain locked between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. If you hear knocking from inside, do not unlock the door. Chart any sounds as patient resting comfortably. I stopped reading, rubbing my eyes. These weren't medical protocols. They sounded like instructions for surviving a haunted house. But I needed this job, and Dr. Thorne had emphasized following procedures exactly. At 12:30 a.m., I made my first rounds. Most patients were sleeping peacefully, their monitors beeping steady rhythms that created a familiar symphony I'd heard throughout my nursing career. Room 314 was different. The 3 patients lay motionless under white blankets, their faces pale and waxy. But when I entered to check their IV lines, the woman nearest the window turned her head toward me. "Could you bring me some ice chips?" she asked, her voice dry but clear. "My mouth feels terrible." I checked her chart. Dolores Whitman, 73, admitted with advanced pancreatic cancer. According to her records, she'd passed away Sunday evening surrounded by family. Today was Wednesday. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman. I'll be right back." The ice machine on the 3rd floor dispensed perfectly normal ice chips into a small cup. When I returned to 314, Mrs. Whitman thanked me and began eating them slowly, savoring each piece like it was the most refreshing thing she'd ever tasted. Her roommate, an elderly man named Chester Polk, asked if I could raise his bed slightly so he could see the television better. "What would you like to watch?" I asked, reaching for the remote. "Don't matter much. Just nice having something to look at while I wait." "Wait for what?" Chester smiled, his eyes focusing on something beyond my shoulder. "For them to figure out what comes next. Nobody expected us to linger like this, but here we are, still thinking and feeling and wanting things. Puts the administration in quite a pickle." I adjusted his bed and moved to the 3rd patient, a woman in her 60s whose chart identified her as Emma Joyner. She appeared to be sleeping, but when I checked her pulse, which was non-existent. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "You're the new night nurse, Dewey, right? Dr. Thorne mentioned you'd be starting soon." "Yes, ma'am. Is there anything you need?" "Just wondering if you could turn the heat up a bit. Gets cold in here at night, and we can't seem to get warm anymore." I promised to adjust the thermostat and finished my rounds. The other patients were normal, breathing, sleeping, requiring standard nursing care that made sense according to everything I'd learned in school. But room 314 lingered in my thoughts as I returned to the nursing station and continued reading the protocols. Protocol 5. Do not enter room 301 alone. If patient care requires entry, bring another staff member or wait until day shift arrives. Protocol 6. If the elevator stops on the second floor without being called, do not exit. Press the button for your intended destination and wait for normal operation to resume. Protocol 7. Any patient who asks about the others downstairs should be given 2 milligrams of lorazepam and charted as experiencing anxiety related to their medical condition. Protocol 8. During your shift, you may encounter staff members who are not scheduled to work. Treat them courteously, but do not accept their assistance with patient care. Report any such encounters to Dr. Thorne. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, 3 call lights lit up simultaneously above room 314. The call lights blinked in perfect synchronization. 3 red dots pulsing above room 314, like a heartbeat monitor measuring something that shouldn't have a pulse. I checked the wall clock. 2:17 a.m. exactly, just as Protocol 1 had predicted. The intercom crackled to life before I could reach for the communication button. "Nurse?" Mrs. Whitman's voice came through the speaker, clearer than it had been during my earlier visit. "Did you help us with something?" I grabbed my stethoscope and headed down the hallway, passing rooms where living patients slept peacefully, their breathing creating soft whispers behind closed doors. Room 314 felt different as I approached. The air seemed thicker, carrying the faint scent of roses mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Not decay, exactly, but the absence of life processes that keep a body fresh. When I entered, all 3 patients were sitting upright in their beds, looking more alert than most living people at this time of night. Chester Polk had combed his hair and adjusted his hospital gown so it lay neatly across his chest. Emma Joyner held a small hand mirror she definitely hadn't possessed during my earlier rounds, checking her appearance like she was preparing for visitors. "We've been thinking," Mrs. Whitman said, folding her hands over the blanket that covered her motionless legs. "About our situation here, how long this might continue." "What can I do to help you feel more comfortable?" I asked, remembering Protocol 1's instruction to bring only what they requested. "Could you check with Dr. Thorne about our discharge papers? We'd like to know when we'll be transferred." Chester's question sounded completely reasonable, the kind of inquiry patients made every day. Except most patients asking about discharge still registered on cardiac monitors. "I'll contact her in the morning," I promised. "Anything else you need right now?" Emma held up the mirror, angling it so I could see my reflection alongside hers. In the glass, I appeared normal, tired from the late hour, but clearly alive and breathing. Emma's reflection showed nothing. The mirror reflected the hospital bed behind her, the IV pole, even the small water pitcher on her bedside table, but no trace of the woman holding it. "Could you turn off the overhead light?" she asked, lowering the mirror. "We prefer the softer lighting from the hallway." I switched off the room's main lighting, leaving only the gentle glow filtering in from the corridor. The 3 patients settled back against their pillows, thanking me politely before I left to complete my rounds. Room 308 held Mrs. Betty Carnes, an 89-year-old farmer's widow recovering from a hip fracture. She was awake when I checked on her, staring toward the doorway with concern creasing her weathered features. "Nurse Hutchins, there's children running around in the hallway. Don't their parents know it's way past bedtime?" I looked out into the corridor, seeing nothing but empty wheelchairs parked against the walls and the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Protocol 2 was clear about this situation. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Carms. Sometimes the hospital feels busy even during quiet hours, trying to get some rest. But I can hear them laughing and playing games. Sounds like they're having a grand time, but this ain't no place for youngsters at this hour." I adjusted her blankets and checked her pain medication schedule. "Is there anything I can get you to help you sleep better? Maybe just close my door part way. Might muffle the sound a bit." I pulled her door nearly closed, leaving just enough space for me to monitor her from the nursing station. As I walked back down the hallway, I heard what Mrs. Carnes had described. Faint giggling echoing from somewhere near the elevator bank, accompanied by the soft slapping of bare feet against the linoleum flooring. When I turned to investigate, the sounds stopped completely. The elevator stood open, its interior lights dim and flickering like a fluorescent bulb near the end of its lifespan. According to Protocol 3, the elevator shouldn't function after midnight, yet here it was, waiting with its doors wide as if inviting me to step inside. The floor indicator showed it was positioned at the main level, but somehow I could see down into the shaft, where basement level beckoned with absolute darkness. I took the stairs instead, needing to retrieve additional IV bags from the storage room on the second floor. The stairwell felt colder than the rest of the hospital, and my footsteps echoed strangely, each step seeming to repeat itself several seconds later from somewhere below. When I reached the second floor landing, I noticed wet footprints leading from the stairwell door toward the pediatric ward. Small prints that could have belonged to children, except the pediatric ward had been closed for renovations since last winter. The storage room held everything I needed: IV fluids, medication supplies, and extra blankets for patients who complained about the hospital's temperature. As I gathered materials for the rest of my shift, I heard voices coming from the direction of the old pediatric wing. Young voices, excited and happy, like kids playing hide and seek during a sleepover. I locked the storage room and headed back toward the stairwell, but the elevator doors opened as I passed. The interior looked normal now, properly lit and functioning, with the floor indicator showing 2 in bright red numbers. When I hesitated, the doors began to close, then opened again, as if the elevator was being patient with my indecision. I pressed the button for the third floor, and the elevator rose smoothly to my destination. But as it climbed, the floor indicator flickered, showing numbers that made no sense. 2, 4, B, 7, 3. When the doors finally opened, I was exactly where I needed to be, standing across from the nursing station where my coffee cup still sat warm beside the stack of patient charts. Room 301 remained locked as Protocol 4 required, but as I passed it during my 3:30 a.m. medication rounds, I heard someone moving around inside. Not the restless shifting of a sleeping patient, but purposeful activity. Drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, what sounded like someone searching through personal belongings. When I paused to listen more carefully, the sound stopped, replaced by gentle knocking against the door. 3 soft knocks, then silence. 3 more knocks, then silence again. I continued past the room without stopping, noting in my mental chart that the patient was resting comfortably, as Protocol 4 instructed. The knocking continued intermittently for the next hour, always in groups of 3, always stopping whenever I approached the door too closely. During my 4 a.m. rounds, I encountered Dr. Samuel Fleming in the hallway outside room 312. He wore scrubs and a white coat, carrying a clipboard, and looking every bit like a physician making late-night patient checks. His name badge appeared authentic, complete with the hospital logo and his photo, but something felt wrong about his presence here. "Good evening, Nurse Hutchins," he said, consulting his clipboard. "I'm here to check on Mr. Davidson in 312. Has he been experiencing any additional discomfort tonight?" Protocol 8 warned about staff members who weren't scheduled to work. I glanced at the duty roster posted near the nursing station. No Dr. Fleming was listed for tonight's shift. "Mr. Davidson has been sleeping peacefully," I replied carefully. "I administered his pain medication at midnight, as ordered." "Excellent. Would you mind assisting me with his examination? I'd like to adjust his treatment plan." "I appreciate the offer, Dr. Fleming, but I can handle Mr. Davidson's care according to his current orders. If changes are needed, I'll coordinate with Dr. Thorne in the morning." Dr. Fleming smiled, the expression never quite reaching his eyes. "Of course. You're following protocols exactly as you should. Dr. Thorne will be pleased to hear about your attention to detail." He walked toward the elevator, his footsteps making no sound against the linoleum floor. When I checked on Mr. Davidson a few minutes later, the elderly man was awake and alert. "That doctor was just in here asking about my medications," he said. "Nice fellow, but I told him I felt fine and didn't need any changes to my treatment. Was that all right?" "You did exactly right, Mr. Davidson. Try to get some rest." The remainder of my shift passed quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital was more active than it appeared, filled with presence and activity that existed just beyond normal perception. At 6:45 a.m., Janet Kessler arrived for day shift, bringing coffee and homemade biscuits that smelled like comfort and normalcy. Janet Kessler had the kind of steady presence that made patients feel safe and colleagues feel competent. She moved through the morning medication routine with practiced efficiency, checking each patient's condition while I provided updates from the night shift. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore comfortable shoes that had clearly walked thousands of hospital miles. "How did the Whitman group handle their first night with you?" she asked as we reviewed the charts from room 314. "They seemed comfortable, made a few requests, asked about discharge planning." I hesitated, then added, "Janet, are they actually dead?" "Yes, honey, they are." She marked something in Dolores Whitman's chart with practiced calm. "Happened Sunday evening, all within about 4 hours of each other. Family vigils, final blessings, the whole peaceful passing process. But they haven't quite moved on yet." We walked toward the elevator, Janet carrying a small cooler filled with medications that required refrigeration. "Does this happen often? Patients staying after?" "Every few months, usually lasts about a week, sometimes longer if they have unfinished business or strong attachments to this place." The elevator doors opened smoothly. Apparently, it functioned normally during daylight hours. "Dr. Thorne says it started about 15 years ago, around the time they renovated the basement level. Before that, people died and stayed dead like they're supposed to." "What's in the basement?" Janet's expression grew thoughtful. "Record storage now. Old patient files, medical equipment that's too outdated to use but too expensive to throw away. But it used to be the pediatric ward, back when Cherokee Village had enough young families to justify a children's section." The elevator descended to the second floor, where Janet needed to retrieve supplies from the pharmacy. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed scuff marks on the linoleum, small shoe prints that looked like they belonged to children running and playing. "Janet, do you ever see kids in the hospital? Patients mention hearing them sometimes." She unlocked the pharmacy door, checking the temperature log on the medication refrigerator. The children aren't patients, Dewey. They're the reason we had to close the pediatric ward. What happened to them? Nothing dramatic. No terrible accident or tragedy that would make for interesting gossip. She selected several vials from the refrigerator, checking expiration dates. Just normal childhood illnesses that couldn't be treated in time, infections that spread too quickly, accidents that couldn't be prevented. Rural medicine in the 1980s wasn't what it is today. But they're still here. They're still playing, still laughing and running around like healthy children do. Sometimes they try to visit the adult patients upstairs, offering comfort to people who remind them of their grandparents. Janet locked the pharmacy, and we headed back to the elevator. Mrs. Carnes probably heard them last night. They like her because she used to run the Sunday school at Cedar Grove Baptist. Back on the third floor, Janet showed me the proper way to interact with room 314's residents. She knocked gently before entering, greeted each patient by name, and asked about their specific needs for the day. "Good morning, Dolores. How are you feeling?" Mrs. Whitman brightened considerably. "Much better, thank you. That new nurse, Dewey, took excellent care of us last night. Very professional and courteous." "I'm glad to hear it. Would you like me to open the blinds? It's a beautiful morning." "That would be lovely. We don't get to see much of the outside anymore." Janet adjusted the window coverings, allowing morning sunlight to stream across the room. In the natural light, the three patients looked more obviously deceased, their skin waxy and pale, their eyes lacking the moisture of living tissue. But they smiled warmly and thanked Janet for the improved view of the parking lot, where early visitors were arriving for morning appointments. "Chester, your daughter called yesterday evening. She wanted me to tell you that your grandson made the high school baseball team." Chester Polk's face lit up with genuine pride. "That boy's got a good arm. Takes after his grandfather." He paused, looking thoughtful. "Could you ask her to bring his game schedule when she visits? I'd like to know when he's playing." "Of course. Emma, how's your comfort level today?" "Getting better every day, thank you. Though I was wondering, could you check with administration about extending our stay? We're not quite ready for the next step yet." Janet promised to discuss their concerns with Dr. Thorne, then led me back to the nursing station, where she began preparing for the day shift routines. "How long have you been working here?" I asked. 14 years next month. Started right after my youngest graduated high school." She organized patient files into neat stacks. Took me about 6 months to get used to the unique aspects of this job. But it's good work, helping people transition peacefully, whether they're heading home or heading somewhere else entirely. Does everyone who guys here stick around? Goodness, no. Most people pass on normally. It's only certain individuals who linger. Usually those with strong emotional connections to the hospital or unresolved concerns about their families. Janet pulled up patient records on the computer terminal. The protocols help manage situations that might otherwise become disruptive or frightening for other patients. She showed me the digital records for room 314's residents. Each file contained normal medical information, diagnoses, treatments, family contacts, but also additional notes in a section labeled Post-Discharge Considerations. Dolores Whitman's file noted, "Patient expressed concern about husband's ability to manage household finances, requesting extended transition period." Chester Polk's record included grandfather figure to multiple grandchildren, wants to see grandson's baseball season begin before departure. Emma Joyner's notes read, former hospital volunteer, strong attachment to facility and staff, needs time to complete emotional separation. "They're not staying because they're angry or afraid," Janet explained. "They just need a little extra time to feel comfortable about leaving. We've learned that fighting the process, or trying to force them to move on, just creates more problems." "What kind of problems?" Janet's expression grew serious. "About 8 years ago, we had an administrator who decided the whole thing was nonsense. Started pressuring the morgue attendants to remove deceased patients immediately, regardless of their condition. Had maintenance disconnect the call buttons in rooms where people had passed away." "What happened?" "The entire hospital became active. Elevators running constantly between floors, lights turning on and off throughout the night, medical equipment activating without being touched. Patients reported seeing dozens of people wandering the hallways, former patients who'd been rushed out before they were ready to leave." She pulled up another file on the computer showing incident reports from that period. Page after page of documentation, malfunctioning equipment, patient complaints, staff reporting encounters with individuals who weren't on any visitor logs. Room 301 was the worst. That's where we used to house patients who were actively dying, so families could spend final hours together privately. After the administrator's new policies, that room became problematic. That's why it stays locked at night. Among other reasons, the patient who died there during that difficult period, Mr. Eugene Barnes, had been forced out too quickly. He came back angry, not peaceful like our current residents. Started interfering with other patients' care, trying to convince them they needed to stay and fight the hospital's policies. Janet closed the file and turned to face me directly. Dr. Thorne restored the old protocols, and most of the disruptions settled down. But Mr. Barnes still occupies 301, and he's not as cooperative as our other post-discharge patients. That's why staff aren't supposed to enter alone. The morning passed quickly as Janet taught me additional aspects of the job that weren't covered in orientation. How to document encounters with former patients without alarming state health inspectors, which family members were aware of their relatives' extended stays, and which ones preferred to believe their loved ones had moved on immediately. How to distinguish between helpful lingering spirits and problematic ones that required Dr. Thorne's direct intervention. At 10:30 a.m., Janet received a call from the billing department about discharge paperwork for room 314. "Tell them we're still working on final arrangements," she said into the phone. "No, the families are aware of the situation. Yes, I'll have Dr. Thorne call you this afternoon." After hanging up, she shook her head with mild frustration. Administrative staff turnover means constantly explaining our procedures to people who think everything should fit into standard computer categories. How do you handle the insurance aspects? We don't bill for post-discharge care. The hospital absorbs those costs as part of our community service commitment. Janet checked her watch, nearly time for my shift to officially end. Dr. Thorne established a special fund for situations like this. Says it's the right thing to do, helping people transition at their own pace, rather than according to bureaucratic schedules. As I prepared to leave, Janet handed me a small notebook bound in brown leather. Previous night, nurses have used this to record their observations and experiences, not official documentation, just personal notes that might help you understand what you're seeing. She smiled warmly. Read through it when you get home. Might answer some questions you haven't thought to ask yet. I thanked her and headed toward the parking lot, where my pickup truck sat baking in the Arkansas morning sun. The drive home took me past the Spring River, where early morning fishermen were already casting lines into the clear water, and through downtown Cherokee Village, where the Ozark Cafe was serving breakfast to local retirees who gathered daily to discuss weather, politics, and high school football prospects. Normal life continuing as it always had, while 3 miles away, dead patients politely requested ice chips and asked about visiting hours. That evening, before returning to work, I opened Janet's notebook and began to read. The notebook sat on my kitchen table beside a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I read. Janet hadn't exaggerated. The leather binding contained observations from at least 6 different night nurses spanning the past decade, each entry dated and initialed, creating a chronological record of encounters that no official hospital documentation would ever include. March 15th, 2019, DM Room 314 patient asked me to mail a letter to his sister in Memphis. Found the envelope empty when I got home, but sister called hospital next day, saying she'd received his final message in a dream. Dr. Thorne says some communications don't require postal service. July 22nd, 2020. KL children from old pediatric ward played hide-and-seek in supply closets today. Found medical supplies arranged in neat little tea party settings. Left everything as they arranged it. Janet says disrupting their games causes crime that echoes through ventilation system for days. October 31st, 2021. RW Halloween brought unusual activity. Mr. Barnes in 301 became agitated, banging on door and shouting about costume parties he wasn't invited to. Required Dr. Thorne's intervention at 3 a.m. She brought him a piece of pumpkin pie from cafeteria, and he settled down immediately. Note: deceased patients seem to miss holiday celebrations most. Page after page revealed a pattern of gentle, supernatural encounters managed through compassion rather than fear. Previous nurses had learned to work with the hospital's unique residents rather than against them, treating post-death lingering as simply another aspect of patient care requiring specialized attention. January 8th, 2022. MH new elevator behavior. Stops on floors that don't exist. Pressed button for 3rd floor, but doors opened onto what looked like a sunny meadow, with children playing in tall grass. Could hear their laughter clearly. Doors closed after 30 seconds, continued to proper destination. Janet says this happens when pediatric spirits are especially active. Recommends acknowledging their joy rather than showing fear. I closed the notebook and checked the clock, 5:30 p.m. Time to eat dinner and prepare for my second night shift. The entries had transformed my understanding of the job from medical care with supernatural complications to something more like grief counseling that happened to take place in a hospital setting. My second night began with the same routine: receiving report from Janet, checking patient census, reviewing medication schedules. Room 314 still housed its 3 polite residents, though Emma Joyner had been moved to a different bed and now sat near the window where she could observe evening activities in the parking lot. "Good evening, Mrs. Joyner. How are you feeling tonight?" "Much better, thank you. I've been watching families visit during dinner hours. Reminds me of when I volunteered here. Always enjoyed seeing people connect with their loved ones." She paused, looking thoughtful. "Dewey, could you ask Dr. Thorne if there might be volunteer opportunities for people in my current situation? I miss helping with patient care." The request seemed reasonable until I remembered that Emma had been dead for 4 days. But the notebook had taught me that fighting the logic of post-death lingering only created problems. "I'll discuss it with her tomorrow morning." "Wonderful. I know the hospital can always use extra hands, and I have quite a bit of experience here." At 11:45 p.m., I made my first rounds, checking on living patients before the midnight protocols took effect. Mrs. Carnes was awake again, sitting up in bed and looking toward her doorway with obvious delight. "Nurse Hutchins, those children are back." They're being so sweet, peeking around the doorframe and waving at me. One little girl brought me a flower, just set it right here on the bedside table. I looked where she pointed. A small yellow wildflower lay next to her water pitcher, its petals fresh and bright, despite the fact that it was February in Arkansas and nothing was blooming outside. That was very thoughtful of them. The little boy asked about my grandchildren, wanted to know if they liked to play games. I told him about my grandson's train set, and he got so excited. Said he used to have trains too, before he had to come live in the hospital. Following the notebook's advice, I acknowledged Mrs. Carnes's experience rather than dismissing it. It sounds like they're good company for you. Oh, they are. Much better than television at this time of night. The elevator stood open when I passed it, but this time the interior looked different. Instead of the standard hospital walls, the back panel showed what appeared to be a window overlooking a playground where children were playing under bright afternoon sunshine. I could hear their voices, excited calls of "Tag, you're it," and "Higher, push me higher," coming from inside the elevator car. I pressed the button for the second floor, needing to retrieve additional blankets from storage. The doors closed normally, but instead of the usual mechanical sounds of elevator movement, I heard children singing a song I remembered from my own childhood. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The elevator opened onto the second floor, revealing the familiar hallway where I'd walked just the night before. But the singing continued, echoing from somewhere near the old pediatric ward. In the storage room, I found exactly what I'd experienced the previous night. Someone had arranged medical supplies into elaborate play settings. Gauze rolls became snowmen, tongue depressors were constructed into tiny log cabins, and surgical gloves had been inflated and drawn with faces to create balloon animals. The arrangements showed creativity and joy that belonged to healthy children at play. I left everything untouched, gathering only the blankets I needed for patient care. On my way back to the elevator, I heard footsteps, small, light steps of children running, coming from the direction of the closed pediatric ward. When I turned to look, I saw them. 3 children, maybe 6 to 8 years old, wearing hospital gowns but moving with the energy of perfectly healthy kids. They waved at me before disappearing around a corner, their laughter lingering in the air like the echo of a music box winding down. Back on the 3rd floor, I checked room 301. The knocking had already begun. Not the random thuds of someone in distress, but a rhythmic pattern that sounded almost like Morse code. 3 short knocks. 3 long knocks. 3 short knocks again. SOS. I stopped walking and listened more carefully. The pattern repeated every 30 seconds, always the same sequence. According to the notebook, Mr. Barnes had been a veteran who'd served in Korea during the 1950s. Military training would have included basic communication signals. Following Protocol 4, I didn't unlock the door, but I did something the protocol didn't explicitly forbid. I knocked back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The knocking from inside stopped immediately. After a long pause, different knocks came through the door, slower, more deliberate. I wished I'd paid better attention during Boy Scouts when they'd taught us Morse code, but I could make out some of the pattern. 3 long knocks, followed by a short, long, short sequence, then 3 short knocks. WAR, maybe? Or perhaps he was spelling out a longer word. The knocking continued for several more sequences, then stopped entirely. For the rest of the night, room 301 remained silent. At 2:17 a.m., room 314's call lights activated on schedule. This time, when I responded, all 3 patients had a different request. "Nurse Hutchins," said Mrs. Whitman, "we've been discussing our situation and we'd like to hold a small gathering tomorrow evening. Just us and any other patients who might be interested in visiting. Nothing elaborate. Perhaps some cake from the cafeteria and a chance to share memories." "What kind of gathering?" Chester Polk smiled. A going-away party. We've decided it's time to move forward, but we'd like to celebrate our time here first. This hospital has been good to us, and the staff has shown such kindness during our extended stay." Emma nodded in agreement. "We'd like to invite the children too, if that's possible. They've been so lonely since the pediatric ward closed, and we think they might enjoy adult company for an evening." The request felt significant. Not just another routine interaction, but a moment of genuine transition. According to the notebook, patients rarely announce their readiness to leave so clearly. "I'll speak with Dr. Thorne about arrangements. Thank you. We're thinking tomorrow evening around 8 o'clock, after visiting hours end. That way we won't disturb the living patient's rest." As I left room 314, I realized my second night had fundamentally changed my understanding of the job. These weren't supernatural problems requiring management. They were people completing necessary emotional processes that happened to continue after biological death. The remainder of my shift passed peacefully, with normal patient care punctuated by occasional glimpses of children playing in peripheral vision and the gentle sounds of former patients settling into whatever came after letting go. Dr. Thorne arrived early for our morning meeting, carrying a cardboard box that smelled like vanilla cake and a manila folder thick with what appeared to be event planning documents. Her usually composed expression showed genuine excitement, the kind of anticipation normally reserved for family celebrations rather than hospital administrative tasks. "Janet tells me our room 314 residents are ready for their farewell gathering," she said, setting the box on the nursing station counter. "I've been coordinating these transitions for 8 years now, and I still find them remarkably moving experiences." What exactly happens during these parties? Think of it as a combination retirement celebration and memorial service, except the guests of honor are present to enjoy the festivities. Dr. Thorne opened the folder, revealing detailed lists and schedules. "We invite current patients who are comfortable with the situation, staff members who worked closely with the departing residents, and occasionally family members who understand the extended care we provide." She showed me the guest list, a surprisingly long document that included patient names, room numbers, and notes about dietary restrictions or mobility limitations. Mrs. Carnes was listed, along with several other long-term patients who'd expressed interest in attending. The pediatric spirits were noted at the bottom. Children from lower level. Provide extra seating and age-appropriate refreshments. How do you handle the logistics of including former patients who aren't officially here anymore? Very carefully, and with tremendous respect for everyone involved. Dr. Thorne pulled out a floor plan showing table arrangements for the hospital's small conference room. "We've learned that treating these gatherings as normal social events, rather than supernatural occurrences, helps everyone feel more comfortable participating." Janet arrived with additional supplies, paper plates decorated with cheerful spring flowers, plastic cups, and napkins that wouldn't look out of place at a church potluck dinner. The normalcy of the party preparations created a surreal contrast with the fact that we were planning a celebration for people who'd been dead for nearly a week. "Has anyone notified the children about tonight's party?" Janet asked, checking items off a handwritten list. "I left a note in their usual play area," Dr. Thorne replied, "along with some coloring books and crayons so they can make welcome cards if they'd like." "What about Mr. Barnes? Should we invite him too?" Dr. Thorne's expression grew thoughtful. "Eugene has been more communicative lately, according to Dewey's observations. The Morse code interactions suggest he's working through his anger about the previous administration's policies." She looked at me directly. "Would you be comfortable extending an invitation? He might benefit from social interaction with the other former patients." The idea of unlocking room 301 and directly engaging with an angry, lingering spirit felt far outside my nursing school training, But the notebook had taught me that compassionate interaction often resolved situations that medical protocols couldn't address. What would that involve? Standing outside his door during morning hours when the lock protocols don't apply, explaining about tonight's gathering, and offering him the opportunity to participate if he chooses. Dr. Thorne handed me a handwritten invitation card. Keep it simple and respectful. He was a good man who became frustrated with circumstances beyond his control. After Dr. Thorne left to coordinate catering arrangements, Janet and I spent the morning preparing current patients for the evening's unusual social event. Most responded with curiosity rather than fear. Rural Arkansas residents apparently had more flexible attitudes about supernatural situations than city dwellers. "Sounds like a lovely way to help folks move on peacefully," said Mrs. Carnes when we explained the gathering. "I've been to plenty of funerals where the deceased couldn't attend their own send-off. This seems much more considerate." Mr. Davidson in room 312 asked practical questions about timing and wheelchair accessibility, treating the event like any other hospital social activity that required his participation. "Will there be music? I used to play harmonica with my church group, and I'd be happy to provide entertainment if folks would enjoy it." By afternoon, word had spread through the patient population, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that felt more like preparation for a community celebration than a supernatural occurrence. Several patients requested assistance getting dressed in their nicest clothes, and 2 elderly women asked if they could style each other's hair for the occasion. At 4 p.m., I stood outside room 301 with the invitation card, following Dr. Thorne's instructions to approach Mr. Barnes during daylight hours when the evening protocols weren't in effect. The door remained locked, but I could hear movement inside. Not the angry banging from previous nights, but quieter sounds that suggested someone organizing personal belongings. "Mr. Barnes? My name is Dewey Hutchins, and I'm the new night nurse here. I wanted to let you know about a gathering we're having tonight for some former patients who are ready to move forward. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." The movement inside stopped completely. After a long silence, I heard footsteps approaching the door, followed by a voice that sounded rough from disuse. "What kind of gathering?" "A farewell party for the folks in room 314. They have decided it's time to continue their journey, and they wanted to celebrate their time here with friends and staff. There'll be cake and conversation, maybe some music." Another pause, then. "Will Dr. Thorne be there?" "Yes, sir." "The one who fixed things after that administrator tried to rush everybody out?" "That's right." I heard what sounded like someone sitting down heavily, followed by a long sigh. I've been wanting to thank her for that, for bringing back the old ways of doing things, treating people with dignity instead of hurrying them along like unwanted guests. Tonight would be a good opportunity for that conversation. "What time does this party start?" 8 o'clock in the conference room on the 2nd floor. I'll think about it. Been a long time since I socialized with people. Might be rusty at party conversation. "I think folks would be glad to see you, Mr. Barnes. From what I understand, you've been missed." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation activities. Hospital maintenance set up tables and chairs in the conference room, while the kitchen staff prepared refreshments that included both regular party food and items specifically requested by the supernatural residents. Ice chips for Mrs. Whitman, sweet tea for Chester, and the small vanilla cakes that Emma had mentioned loving during her volunteer days. At 7:30 p.m., guests began arriving. Mrs. Carnes came in her wheelchair, wearing a blue dress she'd requested from her daughter's last visit. Mr. Davidson walked slowly but steadily, his harmonica tucked into his shirt pocket. 3 other patients joined the gathering, each dressed in their finest available clothes and clearly excited about the unusual social opportunity. The children appeared first, as shadows moving along the conference room walls, then gradually became more visible as the party atmosphere developed. 3 young spirits, wearing hospital gowns, but moving with the boundless energy of healthy kids, began exploring the refreshment table with obvious delight. "Look at all this food," said a little girl with pigtails, reaching for a cookie shaped like a flower. "Are we really allowed to eat whatever we want?" "It's a party, sweetie," replied Janet, who seemed to interact with the children as naturally as she would with any pediatric patients. "Help yourselves to whatever looks good." Room 314's residents arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, looking more alert and present than I'd seen them during previous interactions. Mrs. Whitman had somehow arranged her hair in an elegant style, while Chester wore what appeared to be a clean white shirt instead of his usual hospital gown. Emma carried a small bouquet of flowers that definitely hadn't come from the hospital's limited landscaping. "This is wonderful," Emma said, surveying the decorated conference room. "It's been so long since we had a proper social gathering." Dr. Thorne welcomed everyone with a brief speech about the importance of community support during life transitions, then invited guests to share memories and well wishes. The conversation flowed surprisingly naturally, with living patients and former patients discussing shared experiences of hospital life, recovery challenges, and appreciation for quality medical care. Mr. Davidson brought out his harmonica and played several gospel songs that had everyone humming along. The children clapped enthusiastically and requested their favorite nursery rhymes, which he accommodated with obvious pleasure. At 8:45, the conference room door opened, and Eugene Barnes stepped inside. He looked different from what I'd imagined. Not the angry, bitter spirit I'd expected, but a tired-looking man in his 70s, wearing a faded Korean War veteran's cap and a white shirt that had been pressed with obvious care. His appearance drew immediate attention from the other supernatural residents, who welcomed him with genuine warmth. "Eugene!" Mrs. Whitman called out. "We were hoping you'd join us. Come sit with us. There's plenty of cake." He approached their table hesitantly, like someone who'd been isolated for too long and wasn't sure how to rejoin social situations. Chester pulled out a chair for him, and Emma poured him a cup of coffee from the thermal carafe Janet had provided. "I wanted to apologize," Eugene said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room, "for the disturbances, the anger, making things difficult for staff and patients. I was frustrated with how things were handled a few years back, and I took it out on people who were just trying to do their jobs." Dr. Thorne approached their table, pulling up an additional chair. "Eugene, you have nothing to apologize for. The policies during that period were wrong, and your reaction was completely understandable. I'm glad you decided to join us tonight. I wanted to thank you for changing things back, for treating people with respect again. Made a difference to folks like us who needed extra time to sort things out. That's what compassionate care should look like," Dr. Thorne replied. "I'm sorry it took so long to correct those mistakes." The party continued for another hour, with conversation growing more relaxed as guests shared stories, jokes, and expressions of mutual appreciation. The children played quiet games in one corner, occasionally running over to show the adults pictures they'd drawn or to request help reaching items on the refreshment table. As the evening wound down, the supernatural residents began expressing their gratitude to staff and patients who'd made their extended stay comfortable and meaningful. "This has been exactly what we needed," said Mrs. Whitman, addressing the entire group. "A chance to say proper goodbyes and move forward with happy memories of our time here." At 10 p.m., the guests began departing. Living patients returned to their rooms with the help of nursing staff, while the children gradually faded from visibility like photographs slowly losing their color. The former patients lingered longest, spending individual time with Dr. Thorne and Janet, expressing specific thanks for kindnesses received during their care. Eugene Barnes was the last to leave, shaking hands with Dr. Thorne and promising that room 301 would no longer require special protocols. "I'm ready now," he said simply. "Thanks for giving me the chance to end things properly." By 10:30, the conference room held only living staff members and the lingering scent of vanilla cake mixed with flowers that shouldn't have existed in February. The hospital felt different during my rounds that night, as if the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath for days. Room 314 stood empty, not just vacant, but genuinely empty in a way that suggested its former occupants had truly moved forward. The beds were neatly made with fresh linens, the monitors had been disconnected and wheeled away, and even the lingering scent of roses that had marked the room for nearly a week had dissipated into ordinary hospital air. I stood in the doorway, checking the space one final time. No call buttons would blink red at 2:17 a.m. anymore. No polite requests for ice chips or pain medication would crackle through the intercom system. The 3 people who had occupied this room for 6 days after their deaths had found whatever peace they'd been seeking. Janet had warned me that transitions could feel abrupt after weeks of routine supernatural interactions. "One night they're asking for extra blankets," she'd explained during our morning handoff, "and the next night their rooms feel like regular hospital spaces again. Take some adjustment." Room 301 showed similar changes. The door stood unlocked for the first time since I'd started working nights, and when I peered inside, I found a completely ordinary patient room, furnished with standard medical equipment and basic accommodations. No angry knocking echoed from within. No Morse code messages tapped against the doorframe. Eugene Barnes had apparently found his own path forward after last night's gathering. Mrs. Carnes was awake when I checked on her, sitting up in bed and looking toward her doorway with a mix of sadness and contentment. "They came to say goodbye," she told me, her voice soft with emotion. "The children stopped by around 11 o'clock to thank me for being kind to them and to let me know they were going to play somewhere else now." "How do you feel about that?" "Happy for them mostly. Children shouldn't be stuck in hospitals forever, even sweet ones like those little angels." She adjusted her blankets, smoothing the fabric with weathered hands. "But I'll miss their company. Gets quiet at night without their laughter in the hallways." I promised to check on her more frequently during my rounds, knowing that the absence of supernatural activity might leave some patients feeling more isolated during the long night hours. The elevator operated normally throughout the evening. No mysterious stops on non-existent floors. No views of sunny meadows where children played in tall grass. When I pressed the button for the second floor to retrieve supplies, it simply took me to the second floor, following standard mechanical principles that made sense according to everything I'd learned about elevator functionality. In the storage room, I found medical supplies arranged exactly as they should be, organized by type and size according to hospital inventory procedures. No elaborate play constructions built from gauze rolls and tongue depressors. No surgical gloves inflated into balloon animals. The children had taken their creativity and joy somewhere else, leaving behind only the practical necessities of medical care. Dr. Thorne arrived early again, carrying coffee and what appeared to be satisfaction with a job well done. She moved through the hospital with the relaxed confidence of someone whose carefully managed system had produced exactly the intended results. "How did the first post-transition night feel?" she asked, as we reviewed patient charts in the nursing station. "Quiet. Different, almost like working in a normal hospital." She smiled at that observation. "It is a normal hospital, Dewey. We just define normal a bit more inclusively than most medical facilities. Last night's gathering represents the system working exactly as designed, people receiving the time and support they needed to process their transitions peacefully. Will other patients start lingering soon? Is this an ongoing cycle? Not necessarily. Sometimes we go months between post-death residents. Other times we might have several individuals who need extended care simultaneously. Each situation develops according to the specific emotional needs and attachments of the people involved. Dr. Thorne pulled up staffing schedules on the computer. What matters is maintaining our readiness to provide compassionate support whenever these needs arise. She showed me updated protocols for the coming weeks. Room 314 would return to normal patient care within a few days, once the maintenance department completed standard cleaning and equipment checks. Room 301 would be unlocked permanently, returning to its original function as a family comfort room for relatives of seriously ill patients. The children's departure might be more permanent, Dr. Thorne noted. When pediatric spirits move forward, they typically don't return. They've found whatever resolution they needed and continued their development in more appropriate environments. What about future patients? Will they notice the changes? Some might comment that the hospital feels different, quieter, more conventional. Others won't notice anything unusual. Dr. Thorne closed the computer files and turned to face me directly. Your role will remain the same, providing excellent nursing care with flexibility for situations that extend beyond standard medical practices. Over the following week, I settled into routines that felt remarkably similar to city hospital work. Patients required medications, wound care, comfort measures, and emotional support. All services I could provide without consulting supernatural protocols. The night shift became predictable in ways that actually felt strange after experiencing the dynamic interactions of the previous weeks. Mrs. Carnes was discharged on Friday morning. Her hip fracture healed sufficiently for her to return home with visiting nurse support. Before leaving, she stopped by the nursing station to thank me for the excellent care she'd received. That was the most interesting hospital stay I've ever experienced, she said, leaning on her walker and smiling warmly. Not many places would handle unusual situations with such grace and kindness. 3 new patients were admitted over the weekend, routine cases requiring antibiotic treatment and observation. They settled into their rooms without commenting on children's laughter or unusual elevator behavior. The hospital had returned to serving its primary function as a medical facility for the rural Arkansas community. On Sunday evening, I found myself walking past room 314 during my rounds, half expecting to hear familiar voices requesting ice chips or pillows adjustments. The silence felt both peaceful and oddly disappointing. I'd grown accustomed to the polite interactions with former patients who needed extra time to process their transitions. Janet noticed my adjustment during Monday morning's shift change. Missing them a bit? It sounds strange, but yes. They were good people who happened to need unconventional care. Made the job feel more like counseling than routine nursing. That's exactly what it was. Grief counseling that happened to involve participants who were technically deceased. You handled it beautifully, by the way. Dr. Thorne was impressed with how quickly you adapted to our approach. She handed me an updated copy of the notebook, now containing my own entries from the past 2 weeks. Reading my observations alongside those of previous nurses, I could see the evolution of my understanding from confusion and concern to acceptance and genuine care for people navigating difficult transitions. February 18th, DH room. 314 residents expressed gratitude for respectful treatment during their extended stay. Farewell gathering allowed them to complete emotional business and move forward peacefully. Mr. Barnes in 301 also found resolution through community inclusion. Children from former pediatric ward departed after years of playing in hospital corridors. System working, as intended. The entry looked professional and matter-of-fact, summarizing extraordinary events in language that normalized supernatural experiences as simply another aspect of comprehensive patient care. Tuesday night brought a new admission, an elderly farmer named Cletus Murray, who'd suffered a heart attack while working in his barn. His condition was stable, and he was expected to recover fully with appropriate cardiac medication and rest. Normal medical care for a normal patient presenting normal challenges. At 2:17 a.m., I made my routine rounds, checking on Mr. Murray and 2 other patients who were sleeping peacefully. No call lights blinked above empty rooms. No voices requested assistance from people who no longer required earthly care. The protocols that had seemed so mysterious during my first week now served as simple guidelines for situations that might arise again in the future. The remainder of my shift passed without incident, filled with standard nursing activities that matched everything I'd learned during my medical training. When Janet arrived for day shift at 6:45 a.m., she brought coffee and homemade muffins, treating the morning handoff as a routine exchange of information between colleagues. "Quiet night?" she asked, reviewing patient charts. "Completely normal. Those can be just as valuable as the unusual ones. Gives everyone time to rest and recover between more demanding situations." As I drove home through Cherokee Village, watching the sun rise over the Spring River and casting familiar shadows across Highway 62, I realized that my definition of normal had expanded considerably over the past 2 weeks. The Ozark Medical Center served its community by providing both conventional medical care and compassionate support for transitions that extended beyond biological death. Some notes would be routine. Other notes would require flexibility, creativity, and the understanding that excellent patient care sometimes included services that no nursing textbook had ever described. But all nights would be approached with the same commitment to treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their current state of existence. I was ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks into my employment at Ozark Medical Center, I'd grown comfortable with the rhythm of rural hospital nursing. Most nights passed quietly, filled with routine medication administration, wound checks, and the gentle conversations that help patients through long hours when sleep proves elusive. The protocols remained laminated in my pocket, but I hadn't needed to reference them since the farewell party in February. That changed on a Tuesday evening in late March, when Janet handed me a manila folder containing admission paperwork for a patient unlike any I'd encountered during my nursing career. "Room 318 received a new resident this afternoon," she explained, her tone carrying the careful neutrality I had learned to recognize when discussing unusual situations. Thomas Hartwell, age 34, admitted following a motorcycle accident on Highway 62 near the Spring River Bridge. I reviewed his chart while Janet organized medications for the evening shift. Motor vehicle collision, multiple trauma, emergency surgery at the Regional Medical Center in Mountain Home, then transferred to Cherokee Village for extended recovery care. His condition appeared stable but serious, the kind of case that required careful monitoring and skilled nursing support. "Yeah, what makes him different from our typical trauma patients?" Janet paused in her medication preparation, choosing her words carefully. "Thomas died during transport to Mountain Home. Paramedics performed CPR for 18 minutes. Before achieving return of spontaneous circulation, he was without measurable brain activity for nearly 20 minutes. But he recovered? His body recovered completely. Scans show no brain damage. Vital signs are stable. Reflexes are normal. By every medical standard, he should be functioning at his previous level." Janet closed the medication cabinet, and turned to face me directly. But Thomas insists he's still dead, has been trying to convince staff that his continued presence here is a mistake that needs correction. I'd read about similar cases in nursing journals, patients who experienced clinical death and returned with altered perceptions of their existence. Most resolved within days as brain chemistry normalized following oxygen deprivation. But Janet's expression suggested this situation required more complex management. How long has he been insisting he's deceased? 3 days now. He's polite about it, not agitated or combative, but absolutely convinced that he should be processed according to morgue protocols, rather than receiving medical care. Janet gathered her personal belongings, preparing to leave for the evening. Dr. Thorne wants you to interact with him using your experience with post-discharge residents. See if our approaches for managing deceased patients might help him transition back to accepting his living status. After Janet left, I made my initial rounds, checking on the 6 patients currently occupying our ward. Everyone appeared comfortable and resting peacefully, until I reached room 318, where I found Thomas Hartwell sitting up in bed, fully alert and watching the doorway with obvious anticipation. "You must be the night nurse," he said as I entered. "I've been hoping to speak with someone about my situation here." Thomas looked completely healthy. Good color, clear eyes, strong voice. His monitors showed normal vital signs, and his surgical incisions were healing properly. But something in his demeanor suggested deep confusion about his current circumstances. "I'm Dewey Hutchins. How are you feeling tonight, Mr. Hartwell?" I spent the next hour talking with Thomas about his experiences, his perceptions of his current status, and what kind of support might help him feel more settled during his hospital stay. Unlike typical post-death residents, he retained all his memories, personality, and cognitive abilities, but shared their absolute certainty about his deceased status. At midnight, I called Dr. Thorne's emergency contact number, explaining Thomas's situation and his requests for modified care approaches. "Fascinating case," she said after I summarized our conversation. "I've read about similar phenomena in medical literature, but never encountered it directly. Has he expressed any distress about his perceived status? None at all. He seems calm and accepting, just frustrated that his care doesn't match what he believes his condition requires. Let's try accommodating his perspective and see if that helps him process whatever internal conflict he's experiencing. Move him to room 314 tomorrow. Modify his care plan to include the emotional support techniques we use for post-discharge residents, and document his responses carefully. Should I treat him as deceased or living for practical purposes? Both, in a sense. Provide all necessary medical care to maintain his physical health, but interact with him as we would with former patients who needed extended transition time. If he believes he's completing a post-death process, let's give him the space and support to work through that experience safely." The following evening, Thomas had been moved to room 314, where he immediately appeared more comfortable and settled. The familiar environment seemed to reduce his frustration about receiving inappropriate care. "This feels much better," he told me during my rounds, "more consistent with my actual circumstances." Over the next week, I worked with Thomas using techniques I'd learned during interactions with Mrs. Whitman, Chester, and Emma. I listened to his concerns about his transition process, helped him explore his feelings about leaving behind his previous life, and provided emotional support for what he perceived as his movement toward whatever came after death. Remarkably, the approach worked, as Thomas felt heard and understood regarding his perspective on his situation. He began showing signs of psychological integration. His certainty about being deceased gradually softened into uncertainty, then curiosity about his survival, and finally acceptance that he had indeed returned to life following his brief clinical death. "I think I understand now," he told me during my rounds 2 weeks after his admission. The experience of dying was real, but so is this second chance at living. Maybe the confusion was trying to figure out how both things could be true simultaneously. "How do you feel about continuing your recovery now? Ready to work with the physical therapy team and focus on getting strong enough to go home? Still processing what happened during those 20 minutes, but no longer convinced I need to be dead to make sense of the experience." By month's end, Thomas was discharged to outpatient care, having made a complete physical and psychological recovery. His case became part of the hospital's informal documentation of unusual situations that required creative approaches to patient care. The notebook gained a new entry that would help future nurses understand that sometimes living patients needed post-death support techniques, just as deceased patients sometimes required standard medical care. 1 year later, I stood in the same nursing station where Dr. Thorne had first handed me those 8 protocols, watching the nervous young woman named Rebecca Walsh read through the laminated cards with the same mixture of confusion and concern I'd felt during my first week. She'd graduated from the University of Arkansas nursing program 2 months ago and taken this job for the same reason I had. Cherokee Village Medical paid significantly better than city hospitals. "These protocols seem unusual," Rebecca said, looking up from the cards with questioning eyes. "They cover situations you might encounter that aren't discussed in nursing school," I replied, settling into the mentor role that Janet had once provided for me. "Follow them exactly, and remember that excellent patient care sometimes requires flexibility beyond standard medical procedures." Rebecca nodded, though her expression suggested she was still processing what she'd signed up for. I remembered that feeling, the sense of stepping into a job that was simultaneously familiar and completely foreign to everything I'd learned during my medical training. "Are there really patients who—" She hesitated, checking the cards again. "Who need care after they've technically passed away?" "Sometimes. When it happens, treat them with the same respect and professionalism you'd show any other patient. Their needs might be different, but their dignity matters just as much." The past year had brought a steady stream of unique situations that reinforced my understanding of the hospital's role in the community. 3 more post-death residents had required extended care, including a former pastor who'd lingered for 2 weeks to comfort other patients facing terminal diagnoses. The children's spirits had returned twice, each time playing quietly in unused areas before moving on again after a few days. Most significantly, I'd learned to see these supernatural encounters not as disruptions to normal medical care, but as extensions of the healing process that sometimes continued beyond biological death. The hospital served families and individuals who needed time, space, and compassionate support during transitions that couldn't be rushed or forced according to administrative schedules. The enhanced salary had covered Mama's cancer treatments completely, allowing her to receive care at the specialists in Little Rock without the family going into crushing debt. More importantly, my experience caring for people navigating complex transitions had helped me support her through her own difficult journey with grace and understanding I wouldn't have possessed a year ago. "The key," I told Rebecca as we began making evening rounds together, "is remembering that every person, living or otherwise, deserves care that honors their individual needs and circumstances. Sometimes that means standard nursing procedures, and sometimes it means approaches that no textbook ever described." We stopped outside room 314, which currently housed Mrs. Dorothy Simmons, an 81-year-old quilter who'd passed away that morning surrounded by family. Her call light had already started blinking at regular intervals, and faint humming could be heard coming from inside. Old hymns she'd sung at Macedonia Baptist Church for 60 years. "She'll probably request materials to work on a quilt project," I explained to Rebecca. Her daughter mentioned that she'd been worried about finishing a wedding quilt for her granddaughter's ceremony next month. We'll provide whatever she needs to complete that work. Rebecca stared at the blinking call light, her nursing school training clearly struggling to process the situation. And this is normal here? This is normal here, I confirmed. Different from what you might experience at hospitals in Little Rock or Fayetteville, but normal for Cherokee Village. Our patients come from families who've lived in these hills for generations, and they understand that healing doesn't always follow urban medical schedules. At 2:17 a.m., Mrs. Simmons's call light activated along with two others from rooms housing recently deceased patients who'd arrived during the afternoon shift. Rebecca looked at me with wide eyes as the intercom system crackled to life with polite requests for assistance. "Ready for your first night of real nursing?" I asked, heading toward the supply closet to gather the materials our patients would need. She followed close behind, clutching the protocol cards like a map through unfamiliar territory. "I think so," she said, though her voice carried the same uncertainty I'd felt during my first encounters with the hospital's unique residents. By morning, she'd understand.